Her son lands in the ICU, not knowing her billionaire CEO ex was there with his pregnant wife. The crisis that changes everything. Niall collapses unexpectedly, forcing Riona into a race against time. The story opens with fear, urgency, and a mother's desperation. Family. Let me ask you something real quick. What would you do if the one person who gives your life meaning suddenly couldn't breathe, and you weren't there to help them? Would your heart stop? Would the world freeze? Would you forget every calm thought you ever had? Because that's exactly what happened to Riona Calder on the day her life changed without warning. She wasn't expecting any trouble. She wasn't expecting any emergency. She was just sorting medical files like she did every afternoon. Tired, overworked, but pushing through because a mother doesn't get the luxury of slowing down. At first, she almost didn't answer. But the moment she heard the voice on the other end, everything inside her shut down. The folder she was holding slipped and scattered across the floor, papers drifting around her feet. She didn't even notice. Her entire world shrank to one thought: get to my son. Now. The hallway blurred. Her steps were shaky, her breaths sharp and uneven. She kept whispering the same words over and over as though fear might loosen its grip if she said them enough times. Please, hold on, baby. Please. She reached the entrance just as paramedics burst through the doors with a stretcher, and the sight nearly destroyed her. A little boy, her sunshine, her reason to fight every day, lay there with a face far too pale, chest rising in short, uneven gasps. "Ma," he whispered, barely audible. That one broken sound tore through her like glass. "I'm here," she breathed, trying to smile even as her voice trembled. "Mama's right here. But the truth?" She was terrified. The paramedics didn't slow down. They pushed him straight toward the ICU, and Riona followed with her heart in her throat. Every machine, every clipped instruction from the doctors, every flash of urgency carved deeper into her growing panic. Because in moments like this, hope feels slippery, faith feels fragile, and a mother's fear becomes something sharp enough to cut through bone. This wasn't a moment she could prepare for. This wasn't a moment she could pray away. This was the kind of crisis that doesn't ask permission before shattering someone's life. And as the ICU doors closed in her face, blocking her from her son, Riona felt something inside her collapse too. Not just fear, not just helplessness, but the dawning realization that she might be standing at the edge of a moment that could rewrite her entire future. A mother's silent battle. Riona's emotional turmoil as she waits in the hospital. Her financial struggles, loneliness, and the heavy weight she carries alone set the tone. While the ICU doors stayed closed, Riona stood frozen in the hallway, gripping her hands so tightly her knuckles turned white. The sudden quiet around her felt heavy, too heavy. Moments earlier, everything had been movement, doctors rushing, machines beeping, questions flying around her, but now she was left with stillness, and stillness was its own kind of terror. She sank into the nearest chair, elbows on her knees, head bowed. No tears came at first. Shock wouldn't let them. Fear built a wall around her chest, and it was getting harder to breathe. She whispered, "Please be okay. Please." Her voice cracked on the last word. For years she had carried the world on her shoulders with no one to share the weight. No partner to lean on. No family nearby. Just long shifts, double jobs, and the determination to give Niall the childhood she never had. But sitting there, staring at the blank wall across from her, she felt the truth clawing its way up. She was tired. She was scared. And she was alone. The uncertainty of it all hit her like a wave. She didn't know how long Niall needed to stay. She didn't know what the diagnosis would be. She didn't know how she'd pay for whatever came next. Her paycheck barely covered rent, food, and school expenses. Medical emergencies weren't something she had the luxury to plan for. Every bill from this place would feel like another stone being added to a load she already struggled to carry. But none of that mattered right now. Money could wait. Work could wait. Pride could wait. Her son couldn't. She leaned back against the wall and closed her eyes. A soft ache bloomed behind them. Not just physical exhaustion, but emotional weariness built over years of pretending she was fine when she wasn't. Her phone buzzed. Her night shift supervisor. She couldn't answer. Not like this. She turned the phone off and placed it in her bag. She didn't have the strength to explain why she wouldn't make her shift. She didn't have the energy to hear frustration or disappointment. She pressed her palms together and whispered another quiet plea, steadying herself. "You're strong, Rio. You've survived worse. You'll get through this. Even strong people break sometimes. Even the toughest hearts need somewhere to fall." And right there, in that cold hospital hallway, Riona felt herself dangerously close to falling. Not because she was weak, but because the love she carried was too big, too consuming, too fragile to bear alone. She held on to a simple thought, the only one keeping her steady. Just let my baby breathe. Everything else I can figure out later. But fate wasn't done with her. Because while she fought her silent battle, another life from her past was about to walk into this very hospital, and nothing would ever be the same. Two worlds collide in the ICU. Darian arrives at the same hospital with his pregnant wife. He sees Riona for the first time in years, unaware of the crisis unfolding around her. Family. This is where destiny edges two lives back toward each other, long before either one realizes what's about to hit them. While Riona sat trembling in the waiting area, fighting her fear in silence, another story was unfolding on the opposite side of the hospital. A story polished with wealth, privilege, and the kind of comfort she'd never had access to. Darian Hale stepped out of a private elevator with his wife Selina by his side. The hospital staff knew exactly who he was, the young powerhouse whose company had dominated headlines for years. He moved with a confidence he had earned through grueling work and ambition, but today, even that confidence was shaken. Selina had experienced a sudden complication earlier that morning. Nothing life-threatening, but enough to make every doctor insist on monitoring her closely. Darian had barely left her side since they arrived, hovering near her, asking questions, pacing whenever she closed her eyes to rest. He wasn't worried about board meetings or stock forecasts. He wasn't thinking of magazine interviews or investor calls. His mind was locked on one thing only, protecting the family he was building. But as he stepped into the hallway to speak with an attending physician, something shifted inside him. A quiet tension, almost like a whisper of a memory, brushed against his awareness. He ignored it at first, until he rounded a corner and felt his stride falter. His gaze caught on a figure sitting alone at the end of the hall. A woman with dark hair pulled back in a tired knot. Shoulders slumped. Clothes rumpled. Head bowed in worry. Something about her presence tugged at him so sharply that his breath paused. He blinked, looked again, and the world tightened around him. It was her, Riona, the woman he had once loved with every piece of himself, The woman he had pushed away for a dream he thought mattered more. The woman he tried, and failed, to forget. He hadn't seen her in years, yet the recognition hit him instantly, staggering him in a way he wasn't prepared for. Her posture, her quiet strength, even in distress, the familiar curve of her profile. Nothing about her had faded from his memory. She looked exhausted, fragile in a way he had never known her to be. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. He took half a step forward, instinct pulling him toward her, but he froze. Who was she waiting for? Was she okay? A wave of urgency rushed through him before he could stop it, an old instinct he thought he buried long ago. He approached a nurse nearby, his voice lower than usual. "Excuse me," the woman sitting there. "Is she waiting for someone?" The nurse glanced at Riona before answering. "She's the mother of the boy who was brought in with respiratory distress. He's in the ICU. The words crashed into him harder than anything he'd felt in years. The boy on the stretcher earlier. He remembered catching a glimpse of that scene when he first arrived, but he hadn't known. She was the mother. A humidity gathered in his chest, heavy and unfamiliar. He wanted to go to her. He wanted to ask questions. He wanted to make sure she wasn't breaking under this moment. But he stood rooted in place. He had no right to step into her pain now. No right to reopen a door she once had the courage to walk away from. Before he could decide anything, Selina's voice drifted from the other side of the corridor. "Darian, are you coming back? They need to review the test results." He turned reflexively. Selina, with her hand resting on her stomach, looked at him with concern, unaware of the storm unraveling inside him. When he turned back toward the waiting area, Riona still hadn't noticed him. Her gaze was glued to the ICU doors, her hands trembling in her lap. Two people who once shared everything, now separated by silence, years, choices, and the weight of the moment neither of them saw coming. Two paths that should have stayed apart, colliding again under a hospital roof neither expected to share. And whether either of them was ready or not, fate had begun its work. The shock, tension, and unresolved feelings explode in a single glance. His perfect billionaire life suddenly feels fragile. Family. This is the moment the air stops moving. Riona had been staring at the ICU doors so long her eyes burned, yet she didn't dare look away. Every second she waited felt like miles she had to walk barefoot, carrying worry she didn't have the strength for. Her hands wouldn't keep still. Her breath kept catching in her throat. All she wanted was to hear one doctor say her son was safe. But when a nurse finally stepped out to call another family, Riona shifted slightly, and that tiny movement changed everything. She lifted her head, turned. Just a little, just enough for her gaze to drift across the hallway. Their eyes met, and the world simply stopped. For one long, breathless second, neither of them moved. Neither of them blinked. Neither of them seemed to remember where they were. It was like every buried memory broke loose at once. The nights they stayed up talking about dreams, the promises whispered in dim dorm hallways, the fights, the fear, the heartbreak. All of it surged back without mercy. Riona's heart jerked painfully in her chest. She hadn't said his name aloud in years, yet it rose, uninvited in her mind, with sharp clarity. Darian. He looked exactly how she remembered, and completely different all at once. Sharp suit, controlled posture, a presence that filled the space even when he was silent. But his eyes, the way they softened when they landed on her, That was the part she knew too well. Her breath stuttered. She hadn't prepared for this. She didn't have the emotional armor to face him now. Not with her son fighting for breath behind a closed door. A storm of old hurt, old affection, a new panic rushed through her so fast it left her dizzy. For Darian, the moment hit harder than he expected. He had spent years building a life people praised, a future that looked flawless on paper, but in one instant, all of it felt fragile. Too fragile. He felt something shift inside him, something he didn't want to examine too closely. He whispered her name, barely audible. Rio. Selina turned her head slightly, confused by the change in his tone. Darian, are you okay? Riona's gaze flicked briefly to the woman at his side. The elegant posture, the gentle hand resting on her stomach, the ring that glinted softly under the hospital lights. She noticed everything, and each detail pierced her with a quiet ache she didn't have the strength to mask. Whatever they once were, it no longer mattered. She forced her expression back into something steady, or at least steady enough not to shatter. Her voice was low, barely a whisper of what it used to be. Darian? Emotion flickered across his face. Shock, guilt, longing, something harder to name. He took a small step toward her, instinct pulling him forward despite the years, despite the marriage, despite the silent ocean between their lives. Rio, But she cut him off before the past had a chance to spill out. I need to get back to my son. Her voice trembled, and that tremor punched a hole in his chest. Without waiting for his response, she turned away. He watched her walk back toward the ICU doors, shoulders rigid, head bowed in fear and exhaustion. It hurt far more than he expected, the kind of hurt that made every success he had ever earned feel strangely hollow. Selina touched his arm gently. Darian? Who was that? He swallowed, hard. A long time ago he managed, but nothing about the way he said it sounded distant. Nothing about his expression suggested he was over her. And that was the moment he realized the truth he'd buried for years. Some people leave your life, but never stop living inside you. The emotional hook, the question that will drive the story. The audience learns the central emotional conflict. Why did they break up? Why is she alone? Why does fate bring them back together at their most vulnerable moments? Family. Now we anchor the emotional engine of the entire narrative. The core questions that will keep viewers watching until the very last second. As Riona stood at the ICU doors, trying to keep herself together, her heart raced for two entirely different reasons. One was the fear for her son. The other was the man she never expected to see again. The one person she vowed never to face after he walked out of her life to chase a future big enough for the both of them. Except he never came back. And now, fate had thrown them into the same hallway, on the same day, at the exact moment she was most vulnerable. Why? Why now? Why in the middle of her deepest fear? She pressed her palm against the cold railing beside her, trying to steady her thoughts, but the questions flooded in anyway. Questions she had buried so deeply that speaking them aloud would have felt like reopening an old wound. Why did he leave so easily? Why didn't he fight for them? Why was she forced to rebuild her world from pieces while he built an empire? She blinked hard, refusing to let the emotions cloud her more than they already had. But confrontation has a way of cutting through the strongest defenses. Meanwhile, across the hall, Darian stood rooted to the ground, heart pounding in a way it hadn't in years. The polished world he built suddenly felt unstable under his feet. His suits, his wealth, his marriage, his success, none of it protected him from the truth rising in his chest. He had loved her. Her partner. Why did she look like she'd been carrying the weight of the world by herself? Each unanswered question dug deeper, and a harsh realization grew inside him. He didn't know her anymore. He had no idea what she'd faced after he left. He didn't know who she had leaned on, or who had walked away. And as he watched her trembling hand reach toward the ICU window, he wondered something that shook him more than anything else. Was her son's father the man she chose after him, or someone who chose to abandon her? One truth hovered above every moment that had just played out. Two lives that should have remained separate were pulled back together in a moment of crisis neither of them was prepared for. And now the audience is left with the most gripping questions of all. Did fate bring them back together? Or did fate simply wait for the moment they were both unguarded enough to face what they ran from? And what happens to two wounded hearts when a child's life hangs in the balance? These unanswered questions form the emotional spine of the story, the reason viewers will cling to every scene, every revelation, every confrontation that follows. Because now, family, the real story begins. The emergency. It started as a regular afternoon. The kind Riona Calder had learned to push through even when her body begged for rest. She had been standing in the medical records office sorting folders alphabetically, trying to ignore the dull ache in her lower back. A second job, late nights and early mornings, wore down even the strongest person, but she kept going because she had no choice. She glanced at the clock on the wall. Almost time to pick up Niall. Just the thought of her son softened the tension in her shoulders. His laughter, his curiosity, the way he threw his arms around her the moment she walked through the door. All of it made the hardest days feel lighter. He was her reason, her heartbeat. Her phone vibrated on the counter. She nearly didn't answer. The last chart of the day had to be logged, but the number on the screen made her pause. The school. A swirl of uneasiness slid through her stomach. She answered quickly. "Hello?" The voice on the other end held the kind of urgency that makes a parent's soul seize. "Miss Calder, this is Nurse Brenton." Niall collapsed during recess. He had severe trouble breathing. "We've called an ambulance. They're taking him to your hospital." The world went silent. She pressed a hand against the desk as her balance tilted beneath her feet. "He's breathing but struggling. Please get to the ER immediately." The call ended, but Riona remained frozen, her breath trapped in her chest, the phone still pressed against her ear. A folder slipped from her hand. Papers scattered around her shoes. Her legs moved before her mind caught up. She rushed out of the office, her vision blurring, her heart stumbling over every beat. Please let him be okay," she whispered as she pushed through the hallway. Her voice trembled with a fear she had no power to hide. The world outside was a blur of motion, but she didn't see any of it. She crossed the courtyard with shaky steps, the cool air slicing across her face. She barely felt it. Her mind was consumed by images of her son, smiling at breakfast, humming while tying his shoes, hugging her before school, and the thought of him gasping for breath hit her so hard she nearly folded. By the time she neared the ER entrance, the sharp cry of sirens grew louder. An ambulance pulled up, brakes hissing, doors flinging open. Her heart dropped. "Please," she whispered again, stepping forward. Two paramedics climbed out and pulled out a stretcher, and there he was, her baby, her reason for every sacrifice she had ever made. His small body lay still, his face too pale, his lips slightly parted as he tried to pull in shallow breaths. His eyes fluttered when he saw her. The sound nearly crushed her. "I'm here, sweetheart." "Mama's here," she said, forcing a smile she didn't feel. Her fingers brushed his hand, and it was frighteningly cool. The paramedics moved quickly, pushing the stretcher inside. Riona kept pace beside them, her mind a chaotic storm. Every medical term she knew, every possibility, every worst-case scenario pressed against her thoughts, threatening to tear her apart. Inside the ER, the lights were bright, the pace frantic. Nurses fired questions. Doctors examined him with practiced speed. When did the symptoms start? What triggered it? Was he active today? Riona answered every question she could, her voice trembling despite her efforts to sound composed. He was fine this morning. He said his chest felt tight last night, but I thought it was the weather. I didn't think. A doctor lifted a hand gently. "You did nothing wrong, Miss Calder. We're taking him to the ICU for close monitoring." The word hit her like a blow. No parent hears those 3 letters without feeling something cold crawl through their spine. Will he be okay?" she asked. Her voice cracked. "We'll do everything possible," the doctor said before turning away. Riona took one step after him. Another. But the doors shut in her face. She stopped. Her breath shuddered out of her body as she pressed her palm against the cool glass. On the other side, they were fighting to help her son breathe. On her side, there was nothing she could do, nothing but wait. Her heart hammered so hard she felt dizzy. Her knees threatened to give out. "Please," her voice trembled. "Please save him." She stumbled backward, her mind spinning. She found a chair against the wall and collapsed into it, gripping the edges like she might fall without holding on to something. Time lost its shape. She didn't know how long she sat there, with her hands clasped, her breath shallow, her eyes fixed on the closed doors. Minutes stretched like hours. Every sound startled her. Every footstep made her look up. Her phone buzzed again, her night shift supervisor. She ignored it. Money didn't matter right now. Nothing mattered but the boy behind those doors. Her fingers brushed over the strap of her worn handbag, and a cold fear crept into her thoughts. Bills, insurance deductibles, medication costs. Things she had no room for in her already stretched bank account. She closed her eyes tightly. "I'll figure it out. I always do," she whispered, though her voice wavered with doubt she didn't dare acknowledge. A tear slipped down her cheek, the first one since the call. She wiped it quickly, refusing to break down here, in a hallway full of strangers. "Mama's right here," she whispered softly, not knowing if he could hear her through the walls. "I'm not going anywhere. You keep breathing for me, please." Her head felt light. Fear pressed against her from all sides. But she stayed there, back straight, hands clasped, heart trembling, because that's what mothers do. They stay even when fear tries to push them to the ground. They stay even when they're breaking inside. They stay because love doesn't give them any other choice. And in this moment, as Riona sat gripping the edge of her chair, she had no idea her past was walking down the hall, and that her next breath would collide with a life she once believed she would share forever. A mother holding herself together. The hospital hallway had a strange way of swallowing sound. Conversations faded quickly, footsteps softened, and the only thing that echoed clearly was fear, the kind that settled deep in Riona's chest and refused to loosen its grip. She sat hunched over in the plastic chair outside the ICU, her elbows on her knees, fingers interlocked so tightly that her joints pulsed with pain. She didn't notice. She didn't feel anything except the weight crushing her ribcage. A nurse walked by, offering a polite smile of sympathy. Another adjusted the curtains at the end of the hall. A doctor murmured something to an intern. Life moved around her, but she remained stuck in place, suspended between hope and dread. Her heart hadn't slowed since the ambulance doors opened. Each beat felt like a warning. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Breathe, Rio. Just breathe." But the moment she managed a steady inhale, fear came roaring back. Her son was inside that room. Her child, the one bright part of her life she protected with every bit of strength she had left, was lying under wires and machines because he couldn't breathe on his own. A tear threatened to fall. She wiped it quickly. She didn't want to cry. Not here. Not where she needed to be strong. But the truth settled deep inside her. She was exhausted. Not just physically, but in every part of her spirit. She leaned back and stared at the ceiling, blinking hard to steady her vision. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, casting the hallway in a muted glow that made everything feel cold. She rubbed her arms for warmth, though no amount of friction could soothe the chill of uncertainty running through her. A memory surfaced. Uninvited, unwelcome. Niall at 7 years old, hugging her after a school recital with a grin that nearly swallowed his whole face. "You're the best mom ever," he said, with absolute conviction. She remembered kneeling down to meet his eyes. "I'm trying, baby. Trying?" He laughed. "You already are." That memory alone shattered the careful composure she was fighting to maintain. Her hands trembled as they rested in her lap. Her breathing stuttered. Please let him be okay." Those words became a quiet chant she clung to whenever her thoughts threatened to slip into dark places. She had survived life's blows before. Heartbreak, poverty, long nights working jobs that drained every ounce of strength she had, but nothing compared to the fear of losing her child. Nothing. She pushed her hair back, fingers ghosting over her temple as a dull ache formed there. Lack of sleep, skipped meals, too many responsibilities piling up. Her body was finally showing signs of everything she had ignored for months. But she didn't have the luxury of falling apart. She reached into her bag for her phone, not to scroll or distract herself, just to hold on to something familiar. The screen lit up instantly. Missed calls, messages, reminders. She didn't open any of them. She wasn't ready to explain what was happening, and honestly, she didn't trust her voice not to break. The hospital chair creaked as she shifted. Wrapping her arms around herself in a self-soothing gesture she didn't realize she was doing. Every minute felt long enough to carve a new scar into her thoughts. A man and woman walked past, laughing quietly about some misunderstanding with a nurse. She glanced at them, envy stirring unexpectedly. Not because she wanted their life, but because she wanted their ease, their certainty, their togetherness. Riona hadn't felt that in years. She straightened, grounding herself again. She didn't need anyone. She had learned to build her life brick by brick, even when it looked like it might fall apart. But on days like this, she wanted someone to hold her hand. Just once. Just long enough to remind her she wasn't facing the world alone. Her mind drifted back to mornings when she would rush out the door for her first shift. A stale coffee in hand, a tired smile on her face as she walked Niall to school. "Niall, sweetheart, hurry. Mama's already late." "You're always late," he would say with a cheeky grin. "And whose fault is that?" she'd tease. He'd run ahead, backpack bouncing, and wait for her at the gate. "Your fault. You take forever to wake up." She would laugh, shake her head, and kiss the top of his hair. "That's a lie, and you know it. Now go make me proud." He always did. She didn't know how such a small boy could carry so much joy inside him. Enough to brighten days she barely managed to endure. Her chest tightened again. She swallowed the emotion rising in her throat. "How did this happen?" she whispered. She felt panic rising again, her fingers curling into fists. She forced her eyes shut and focused on breathing evenly. She needed to stay steady. If she fell apart now, who would be there for him? A distant sound jarred her thoughts. The soft click of the ICU doors opening. Her head shot up, heart pounding. A doctor stepped out, but walked toward another family. Relief wasn't coming yet. Her heart sank again. She stood abruptly. Sitting still made her feel like she was suffocating. Her feet carried her to the viewing window, where she could see faint outlines through the glass. Nurses tending to patients. Machines flickering with soft lights. A glimpse of Niall's bed in the far corner, her palm pressed against the glass. He looked so small, so fragile. Her breath shivered. She hated that she couldn't be beside him, couldn't hold his hand, couldn't whisper comfort into his ear. A quiet voice inside her whispered a truth she often ignored. "You're all he has." And that responsibility felt heavy. Heavier today than ever before. She closed her eyes and whispered a promise only a mother could make. "I'm not leaving you. Not today. Not ever." When she returned to her seat, another weight settled on her shoulders, the financial reality she couldn't avoid much longer. Follow-up appointments. Time away from work. She exhaled shakily as her stomach twisted. Her savings were almost non-existent. Her paycheck barely kept them afloat. Her second job helped, but it wasn't enough to cover an emergency like this. Her mind raced through every scenario. Selling her jewelry, cutting back on food, asking her landlord for an extension. But none of it would come close to covering a long stay in the ICU. A fresh wave of helplessness crashed into her. She had always found a way. Somehow. Some miracle always pushed her through the tightest corners. But this was bigger than anything she'd faced. A soft sob escaped before she could bite it back. She turned her head away from the hallway, embarrassed, even though no one was watching. She forced herself to breathe through the tears. Deep inhale, slow exhale. "You're strong, Rio," she murmured through trembling lips. "You've made it through worse. You can't fall apart now." But the truth twisted inside her. Even strong people break. Even the most resilient hearts have limits. And hers felt dangerously close to shattering. She wiped her face again, straightened her spine, and held her chin a little higher. Not because she had strength left, but because pretending to be strong was the only defense she had left. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have imagined, was that her world was about to shift once more, because footsteps echoed softly down the hall. A familiar presence approached, and her past, with all the love and pain she'd buried, was moving closer with every step. A billionaire in the same building, On the top floor of the same hospital where Riona sat gripping hope with trembling fingers, Darian Hale was pacing in front of a private ward, trying to convince himself everything would be fine. This floor didn't look like the one downstairs. Soft chairs instead of hard plastic, art on the walls, quiet corners where wealthy families waited without the buzz and chaos of the main waiting room. People up here didn't worry about bills. They worried about test results and schedules, never whether they could afford another day of care. Darian walked from one end of the corridor to the other, hands in his pockets, jaw tight. His reflection in the glass panel looked composed, but inside his thoughts were tangled. He stopped outside the door of room 705 and peered inside. Selina lay slightly propped up on the bed, one hand resting gently over her stomach, the other scrolling through her phone. Her features were calm, but he could still see the earlier worry remaining in her eyes. She had felt a sharp pain that morning, one that had sent both of them to the hospital without hesitation. "It's probably nothing," she had said with a small smile on the drive here. He hadn't shared her confidence. Now, doctors had ruled out immediate danger, but insisted on observing her for the day, just to be safe. They had used reassurance that sounded clinical, cautious, careful. Darian didn't realize how tightly he was holding his breath until she looked up and met his gaze. "Still pacing?" she asked softly. He walked in, the tension in his posture softening only a little as he moved to the side of her bed. "I'm not pacing. You've worn a track into the floor," she teased gently. "Relax. They said everything is fine." He sat down in the chair beside her, leaning his forearms on his knees. "They also said they want to keep watching. That's routine." She reached for his hand. "You know they're being thorough because of who you are." He frowned. "I don't care who I am. I care about you and the baby." A small, warm smile touched her lips. "We're okay. I promise." He stared at their joined hands. Her engagement ring and wedding band glittered under the light, the stones small compared to what he could have afforded, but Selina had insisted she didn't want anything flashy. He liked that about her. He respected her. He cared about her. So why did a strange emptiness linger beneath his concern? He pushed the thought aside. This wasn't the time for self-reflection. "Did they say when you can go home?" he asked. "If everything looks normal in the next few hours, they'll discharge me," she answered. "You don't have to stay the whole time. I know you have calls. A meeting. Something important." He shook his head. "Nothing is more important than this." She studied his face for a moment, as if trying to read something beneath the surface. "You've built a life where your presence is always in demand," she said gently. "Sometimes I worry you'll get tired of being pulled so many directions." He gave a small half-smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Sometimes I worry I've been pulled in so many directions. I forgot what I really wanted in the first place." She tilted her head. "Is this about the meeting you skipped this morning?" "No," he lied. "This is about you." Her expression softened. "In that case, go talk to the doctor again if it gives you peace of mind. I'm fine here. I'll just be lying still and scrolling through baby name lists." "Yes." She nudged his hand with hers. "Go reassure yourself so you'll stop staring at the door like it might bite you." He huffed out a quiet, reluctant laugh. "That obvious?" "Very." He leaned over and kissed her forehead. "I'll be right back." He stepped into the hallway, the door closing softly behind him. Once outside, the quiet seemed louder. His shoes made measured sounds against the polished floor as he headed toward the nurse's station. A passing staff member nodded respectfully. Everyone on this floor knew his name, the young tech billionaire with a company dominating business headlines. The man who had built a fortune in less than a decade, the patient's husband whose presence made people stand straighter, careful with every word. Darian barely noticed any of it. He spoke briefly with the attending physician, nodding as he listened to reassurances about monitoring, test results, and precautionary protocols. He'd heard worse scenarios in boardrooms, yet nothing shook him like the chance that something could be wrong with the two people lying in that bed upstairs. When the conversation ended, the doctor was paged elsewhere and hurried away. For the first time in hours, Darian wasn't in motion. He stood in the corridor, hands at his sides, staring at nothing in particular. This hospital smelled the same as the one he remembered from his childhood. Sharp, sterile, distant. He had visited his mother once, long ago, in a ward nothing like this one. No private rooms, no soft chairs, just crowded spaces and exhausted people waiting for answers that came slowly, if at all. Back then, he had made himself a promise. He would build a life where he never had to sit in fear in a place like that again. He had kept that promise, at least on the surface. Now here he was, with wealth, access, and influence, yet he felt just as defenseless standing in a hallway as he did when he was 12. He exhaled and started toward the elevator, intending to get a coffee, something to wake his mind and steady his nerves. When the doors opened on a lower floor, he stepped out, planning to head toward the cafeteria. Instead, his attention caught on the signs on the wall. Emergency wing. Something about that direction tugged at him. He turned left, not entirely sure why. He told himself he was just walking while he thought, letting his head clear before going back upstairs. The air on this floor felt different, busier, less polished. Nurses moved with quick efficiency. Darian took it all in quietly, his steps slowing. He was out of place here in his tailored suit, his watch, his demeanor. No one stopped to greet him. No one cared who he was. Down here, names on magazine covers didn't matter. Outcomes did. As he walked, he passed the ICU entrance. The glass panels revealed glimpses of machines, nurses, patients lying motionless under thin blankets, someone's sibling, someone's partner. He kept walking, almost ready to turn back, until he noticed her. At first, it was just a shape seated in a chair at the end of the corridor, a woman, head bowed, posture tense. There were dozens like her in hospitals across the city, relatives waiting for updates, loved ones bracing for news. But something about this figure made him slow down. The angle of her shoulders, the way she clasped her hands in her lap, the tilt of her head as she stared at the ICU door like she could will it to open. His heart gave a single hard jolt. He took another step, needing to see her face. When he did, his breath caught in his chest. It couldn't be. But it was. Riona. His mind blanked for a moment. All the scripts he'd learned over the years, how to navigate investors, media, competitors, vanished. There was no rule book for this. He hadn't seen her in more than a decade, yet time hadn't dulled her impact. Her hair was pulled back in a loose, tired knot. There were faint shadows under her eyes. The clothes she wore were simple, slightly creased, likely from hours of sitting in that exact spot. But her face, still the same woman who once smiled up at him under a canopy of cheap dorm lights and told him she believed he would change the world. He had imagined seeing her again often in the early years after their breakup. Those daydreams had always been polished, controlled. They met at an event, maybe. A reunion. Somewhere professional, somewhere safe, where emotions had time to cool. Not here. Not like this. Not with fear etched into her features as she stared at ICU doors standing between a mother and her child. His heart hammered with questions. What was she doing here? Who was inside that room? Was she all right? He scanned the area, noticing her worn handbag, the absence of anyone sitting beside her. No partner. No relative. No friend hastily walking up with coffee and reassurance. She was alone. A nurse walked past him, and he caught her attention with a gentle, low-spoken, "Excuse me." "Yes," she replied. "The woman sitting there. Is she waiting for someone in the ICU?" His voice had a tightness to it he couldn't quite hide. The nurse glanced toward Riona and nodded. Her child was brought in from a school, breathing trouble. They admitted him a little while ago. His chest felt tight. "A child?" "Yes." The nurse continued down the hall, duty pulling her forward. Darian remained where he was, his gaze locked on Riona. Her child. Questions crowded his mind, colliding with memories. The way she used to talk about wanting more than success. The way she spoke of home, family, warmth. She had always wanted children one day, but with stability, with love, with honest partnership. Had she found that? Had she built it with someone else? Where was that someone now? He took a half step forward, then stopped. He had no idea how she would react to seeing him. For all he knew, she hated him. She had every reason to. He had walked away when they were young, believing he could return once his life was solid. He never did. Each year that passed made reaching out feel more impossible. Now fate had delivered this moment without his consent. His throat felt dry as he watched her. She adjusted in her seat, wiping discreetly at her face, trying to hold herself together. He remembered the way she used to comfort others, never letting anyone see her own pain unless they looked closely. That hadn't changed. He wanted to go to her. He wanted to ask, "Are you okay?" He wanted to say, "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." But his feet felt rooted in place. Upstairs, his wife and unborn child were waiting for him. Down here, his past sat bleeding silently into the hospital air. He stood between two worlds, unsure which direction to move. He didn't know yet that, before the day ended, those worlds would collide so forcefully that every decision he had ever made would be dragged into the light. The collision for a long moment. Darian stood frozen at the end of the hallway, staring at the woman he once thought would share every piece of his future. Riona. Time hadn't softened the impact of her presence. If anything, seeing her here, tired, frightened, alone, hit him harder than he knew how to process. Questions flooded him, each one sharper than the last, but none of them mattered compared to the surge of concern rising in his chest. He took a slow, hesitant step forward. He told himself he had a right to check on her. They had shared years of their lives. She had once been the center of everything he cared about. But with every inch he moved closer, the weight of the past pressed tighter on him. Would she even want to see him? Would she turn away? Would she think he had the nerve to show up in her most vulnerable moment? He didn't know. But he couldn't walk away. Not when she looked like she was unraveling silently in that chair. Not when a nurse had just told him her child was in the ICU. His chest tightened as he imagined her going through this alone. The Riona he remembered was strong, steady even in chaos, but he could see the exhaustion in her posture now, the slight tremble in her fingers, the way she kept standing, then sitting, then standing again as though she couldn't find a place where fear didn't reach her. He moved closer, his steps careful, almost reluctant, as though he was afraid to disturb the air around her. He was only a few feet away when she shifted her gaze slightly toward the window, blinking against a new wave of worry. She still hadn't noticed him. But when she finally turned to rest her eyes from the harsh overhead lighting, her head angled just enough to catch movement in her peripheral view. She lifted her face, her eyes met his, and everything stopped. Shock flashed across her features first, then disbelief, then something deeper, something that punched straight into his gut, pain she didn't bother to hide. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She blinked once, as though trying to confirm he wasn't a trick of her exhausted imagination. He swallowed, unable to take his eyes off her. His voice felt stuck in his chest, but he forced out one word, the one name he hadn't spoken in years but had never forgotten. Rio. Her breath hitched. He hadn't called her that nickname since college, since the nights when they whispered dreams into each other's skin, when love had seemed simple, and the future felt like a promise they were building together. She slowly rose to her feet, the movement stiff, guarded. Everything about her posture screamed uncertainty, a woman caught between memories and reality. Darian? Her voice was soft, but the tremor in it carried a decade's worth of unanswered questions. He stepped closer. Yeah, it's me. She didn't move toward him. She took half a step back instead. That small retreat hit him harder than he expected. He scanned her face, the faint shadows under her eyes, the redness around them, the fear she tried to hide. She had always been good at carrying pain quietly, but today it was written clearly across her features. I didn't know you were here, she murmured, her gaze flickering away from his. A tense silence stretched between them. 10 years of silence. 10 years of questions neither of them had dared to ask. He wanted to say so much, to apologize, to explain, to tell her he never forgot her. But before he could speak, another voice cut into the moment. Her tone wasn't harsh, not suspicious, just confused, curious, unaware of the moment she had stepped into. He turned slightly, instinctively, to acknowledge her. Selina walked closer, her steps slow, one hand resting protectively on her belly. She looked between them with a puzzled expression, like she had stumbled into a conversation whose weight she didn't understand. Riona's eyes dropped to that hand, that soft, tender gesture, then lifted to Selina's face. She noticed the ring, the way Darian automatically steadied Selina with a light touch on her arm. Everything she had once wanted, everything she had once pictured with him. A quiet ache crossed her features, so faint that anyone else might have missed it, but Darian saw it as clearly as if she'd screamed. Selina looked at him again. Is everything okay? Riona straightened. I should go back to the ICU doors. Her voice was thin, stretched tight. She turned, trying to compose herself, but Darian reached out instinctively. Rio. She flinched before he even touched her. The gesture was small, barely noticeable, but it broke something inside him. Please, she said softly, not now. He let his hand fall back to his side, guilt pushing hard into his chest. Selina glanced between them again, her brows pulling together. "You two know each other." He exhaled slowly, feeling a weight settle between his ribs. "A long time ago." Riona didn't look back. She walked toward the ICU doors, her steps uneven, her breath shaky. She paused near the window, staring at the faint outline of her son in the bed, using the sight of him to anchor herself. Darian stared at her back, fighting the urge to go after her, to apologize, to ask 100 questions he had no right to ask. Selina touched his elbow gently. "Darian, what just happened? Because how could he explain what it meant to see the woman you once loved, the one you walked away from, standing alone, terrified, outside the ICU? How could he explain why his heart was pounding harder than it had in years? But that wasn't true. He knew exactly why his chest felt tight, why the room seemed smaller, why the past felt so close. He could almost reach out and touch it. Riona was here. Her child was in trouble, and every part of him wanted to take her pain away, the same way he wished he had once been brave enough to stay. Selina watched him quietly, sensing the shift in his mood, even if she didn't understand it. And for the first time since their arrival, Darian felt something crack in the life he had built. A life that suddenly didn't feel as steady as it once did. He forced himself to stand still, to breathe, to gather himself. But deep inside, one undeniable truth took shape. He wasn't as far from his past as he thought. And seeing Riona again had just torn open a part of his heart he thought had healed years ago. A past that still hurts. Darian returned to the private ward on the top floor, but everything inside him felt different. The polished hallway, the quiet hum of machines, the muted television playing a morning show. None of it registered the same way it had an hour ago. His breath uneven. His thoughts pulled in two opposite directions. Selina glanced up from her phone when he walked in, her expression softening with relief. "There you are. Everything okay?" He forced a steady breath. "Yeah, I just needed some air." "Did the doctor say anything new?" "No, they're still monitoring, but the readings look good." She nodded, satisfied, then returned her attention to her screen. Darian sank into the chair beside her bed. His gaze drifted to the window, where the city stretched out in clusters of buildings and distant lights. Usually that view calmed him. Today it felt like noise. A memory flickered, uninvited, unwelcome. Riona sitting across from him in a tiny coffee shop years ago, stirring her drink absent-mindedly while she talked about her dream of opening a youth center one day. Her face full of light, her voice warm, her plans far more grounded than his, yet somehow bigger in all the important ways. He blinked the memory away. Selina noticed the tension tightening his jaw. "What's on your mind?" He hesitated, just thinking about how quickly things change. She gave a small laugh. "That's life with you, Darian. Every month is a new project, a new partnership, a new headline." He didn't smile. Selina's expression shifted slightly. She put down her phone. "You're not usually this quiet." He didn't answer immediately. Not because he didn't want to, but because he genuinely didn't know how to explain the storm churning inside him. Instead, he asked, "Are you feeling any pain?" "No, just tired." She leaned back against the pillows. "I hate making you worry. I'm your husband." "I'm supposed to worry." His voice was steady, sincere. She reached for his hand and squeezed it. "I know, and I'm grateful. Really." He squeezed back, but his thoughts drifted again. Not toward the company, not toward meetings he was missing, but toward the woman downstairs, whose entire world was lying helpless behind ICU glass. He stayed with Selina for another 20 minutes, listening to her talk about baby names and nursery decor. She was trying, he knew that, trying to pull him out of whatever haze he had fallen into, trying to anchor him to the life they had built. Eventually, she closed her eyes to rest. Darian stood, brushing a hand over her shoulder gently before stepping out into the hall. He checked both directions. No nurses nearby, no one who would ask where he was going. His feet made the decision for him. He took the elevator back down. The moment the doors opened on the ICU floor, the familiar tightness returned to his chest. Riona was still there, seated in the same chair, but now her elbows were on her knees again, her hands clasped together like she was holding herself in place. Her head was bowed, her breaths shallow. She looked like she was teetering between hope and collapse. He approached slowly, quietly, not wanting to startle her. "Rio." She didn't look up at first. Her voice was soft, tired, worn down. "Please, Darian. I can't do this right now. I'm not here to make anything harder," he said gently. I needed to check on you." She lifted her face, and the sight of her eyes, red, swollen, glassy, hit him like a blow. "You shouldn't be here," she murmured. "Maybe not," he admitted, "but I am." She inhaled shakily, her gaze flickering toward the ICU doors. "They're running more tests." "He hasn't woken up yet." The worry in her voice sliced straight through him. He lowered himself into the chair beside hers, leaving space between them, but close enough that she could feel he wasn't rushing to speak or judge or pry. "Rio," he said quietly, "you don't have to go through this alone." She let out a small, humorless sound, something between a laugh and a scoff. "I've been alone for years, Darian. This isn't new." The word stung more than she realized. He looked down at his hands. "I'm sorry." She curled her fingers tightly around her knees. "Sorry for what?" He lifted his gaze, meeting hers steadily. "For every part of your life that became harder after I left. For not being there. For choosing something else instead of choosing you." Her breath faltered. "Darian," she whispered, "don't do this. Not today." "You deserve to hear it," he responded. "I should have said it a long time ago." She shook her head sharply. "No, you don't get to apologize now. Not when my child." Her voice broke. She swallowed hard. "Not when everything is falling apart." He nodded slowly. "Okay, I understand." A heavy silence settled between them, thick with years of things left unsaid. He looked at the glass again. "Rio, the child inside, is he your only one?" She nodded. "Just Niall." Her eyes dropped to the floor. "Not in the picture," she said quietly. The tightness in his chest grew sharper. "By choice?" Darian asked softly. "By reality," she answered. "Life doesn't always unfold the way people expect." He wanted to ask more. So many questions pressed against his tongue. Who left her? Was she abandoned? Was she forced to do everything on her own? Was she okay? But her expression told him she was already carrying enough weight for a lifetime. He leaned back, running a hand through his hair. "Rio, if you need help, I can..." "No." Her voice was swift, defensive. "I don't want your money. This isn't about money. Everything with you is about resources, she snapped. Then her voice softened as exhaustion overtook anger. I've handled everything so far. I'll keep handling it. You shouldn't have to. That's not your choice. He inhaled, steady and controlled. I know, but I'm still offering. She turned away, wiping a tear with the back of her hand. Don't make this complicated. My son is in there fighting his own battle. I don't have space for old wounds. Her words landed straight in the middle of his chest. I never meant to be an old wound, he said quietly. She gave a weak, broken smile. That's what makes it hurt more. He froze, unable to respond. A nurse appeared and glanced at Riona. Ms. Calder? The doctor will be out soon with an update. Riona stood instantly, her legs unsteady. Darian rose too, instinctively reaching out, then stopping short of touching her. Do you want me to stay? He asked. She looked up at him, eyes trembling with fear she tried to hide. I don't know, she whispered. And those 4 words held every truth she had avoided for years. She didn't know how to protect her heart. She didn't know how to rewrite the past. She didn't know how to breathe in, a moment filled with so much fear. She didn't know if letting him near would save her or shatter her. Darian swallowed hard. If you want me gone, I'll go. If you want me here, I'll stay. Her lips parted, but nothing came out. She looked toward the ICU, toward her child, then back at the man who'd once held every piece of her future in his hands. She whispered, Just don't say anything else right now. He nodded. Okay. They stood side by side in silence, both focused on the same set of doors but thinking wildly different thoughts. She feared losing her son. He feared losing her again, a conversation 10 years overdue. The ICU doors swung open with a soft hiss, and a doctor in a navy coat stepped out, scanning the hallway for Riona. The moment she saw him, her breath caught. She rushed toward him, her hands trembling at her sides. How is he? She asked, her voice unsteady. The doctor offered a calm, measured tone. Niall is responding to treatment, but we're still evaluating the cause of the respiratory collapse. His oxygen levels are improving, but we need more tests before we can confirm anything. Can I see him? She asked, hope flickering faintly in her eyes. In a little while. He's sedated to help his breathing settle. I'll come get you when it's safe to go in. Riona nodded, a hand covering her mouth as relief washed over her. Shallow, incomplete, but enough to help her stay upright. The doctor gave her a reassuring nod before walking away. Darian stood a few steps behind her, watching the exchange. He didn't realize he had been holding his breath until his shoulders dropped slightly. He's fighting, Darian said softly. That's a good sign. Riona didn't look at him. She couldn't, not yet. Her mind and emotions were stretched too thin. She walked back to her chair, the weight of the day pressing into every step. She sank into the seat with a shaky exhale. Darian followed quietly, sitting 2 seats away, giving her space she didn't ask for but desperately needed. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't comfortable, but it wasn't hostile either, like an open wound. Riona stared at her clasped hands, her gaze unfocused. She could feel Darian watching her, not with judgment, not with pity, but with a quiet concern that made her chest tighten. Finally, she broke the silence. "Why are you here, Darian?" she asked without looking at him. "Why now?" He swallowed. "My wife had a scare this morning. They're keeping her for observation." Darian leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. I didn't know you were here. I didn't know you had a child. Her jaw clenched. Well, now you do. He winced at the sharpness in her tone. I didn't mean it like that. You don't have to explain anything, she said softly. Your life moved on. Mine did too. He shook his head slightly. That doesn't mean I stopped caring. A bitter smile touched her lips. People don't disappear from someone's life and keep caring. He opened his mouth, but she continued before he could speak. You left, Darian. You chose your path. I wasn't part of it. That was your decision. She took a shaky breath. And I accepted it. The calmness in her tone made the words cut deeper. He leaned back, letting out a long, slow exhale. I made mistakes, Rio. We were young, she said. We didn't know how to hold on to anything without breaking it. No, he responded quietly. I broke it. I know that. The honesty in his voice made her chest tighten painfully. He looked down at his hands. I thought I could come back. I kept telling myself it was temporary. Just a few years of work, then everything would fall into place. He shook his head, eyes filling with regret. But time moved faster than I expected. I didn't know how to reach out when I grew, ashamed of how long I'd waited. She closed her eyes, fighting the sting of tears. Don't do this, she whispered. Please, I need to, he said, voice firm but gentle. You deserve to hear it. No, she repeated, louder this time. Not today. My son is in there, and I can't. Her voice cracked. I can't handle anything else. Her shoulders shook as she fought to keep herself steady. Darian stood, hesitated, then took a single step toward her. Rio. His voice was soft, breaking slightly. She lifted her gaze slowly, and the hurt in her eyes stopped him from moving closer. I'm not saying these things to reopen old wounds, he said. I'm saying them because I've carried them for years. You're not the only one who remembers what we were. She shook her head. Stop. I can't. He drew a breath. I wake up some mornings and wonder what would have happened if I'd asked you to come with me. If I had been brave enough to choose us instead of chasing success alone. Her lips parted, surprise flickering across her face. He continued quietly. Every time something good happened in my life, every victory, every award, I thought about you. Not because I regretted succeeding, but because you were the one who believed in me before any of it existed. Riona pressed her palm against her chest, trying to steady her breath. Darian, why are you telling me this now? Because seeing you today reminded me of everything I lost, he said simply, and everything I threw away. She shook her head again, this time slower, almost dazed. You have a wife. You're expecting a child. Your life is full. It's full, he agreed, but I don't know if it's whole. Silence. Her eyes glistened, but not with affection, with heartbreak. Please don't say things like that, she whispered. Not when your wife is upstairs depending on you. The words landed hard, and he let them sink in. She was right. His responsibilities, his choices, his vows, none of that could be ignored. I'm not saying it to complicate your life, she continued, or mine. I'm saying this because you don't get to rewrite the past, just because it hurts to look at it now. Darian lowered his head. You're right. Riona wiped her face with careful, trembling fingers. I spent years patching myself together after you left. I had to become stronger than I ever planned to be. I learned how to carry myself without leaning on anyone." Her voice cracked. "And today, all that strength feels like it's made of paper." Darian's heart clenched at the truth in her voice. "You've always been stronger than you think," he said quietly. "Maybe," she whispered. "But I'm tired, Darian. And you showing up like this?" She shook her head. "It's too much." He didn't argue. He didn't push. He simply stood there, accepting her pain, even though it cut straight through him. After a long moment, he sat down beside her again, still giving her space, but close enough that she didn't feel completely alone. "I won't say anything else," he murmured. "Not about the past. Not today." She nodded slightly, eyes drifting back toward the ICU. A long silence passed between them. Finally she whispered, "I never wanted my life to turn out like this." Darian looked over at her. "What do you mean?" "I wanted stability. A partner. A home where laughter wasn't something we fought to keep." She exhaled shakily. "But life doesn't bend just because you beg it to." His throat tightened. "Rio, is Niall's father someone who left you to figure everything out alone?" Her jaw flexed. "It doesn't matter." "It does to me." "Why?" she asked sharply. "Why should anything about my life matter to you now?" "Because you mattered to me," he said, voice steady. "More than I ever admitted. More than I ever stopped feeling." She tore her gaze away from him, blinking fast. "You're married, Darian. I know. You're expecting a baby. I know. And you're here telling me things no woman should ever hear from a man who already has a family." His chest ached at her words because they were true. Every single one. "I'm not asking for anything," he said quietly. "I'm just being honest." "Honesty doesn't heal everything," she replied softly. "No. But maybe it can help us understand the pain we've been carrying." She turned slightly toward him. Her features softened, not with forgiveness, but with exhaustion. "You left me, Darian," she said. "You walked away, and I had to live with that. I had to accept it, and now you're here offering apologies I don't know how to hold." He nodded, defeated but still steady. "I won't bring it up again." She exhaled slowly. A nurse approached them. "Miss Calder, the doctor will let you see your son soon. He's stable enough for you to go in next." Relief washed over her so forcefully she swayed. Darian stood immediately. "Are you okay?" She nodded, but her voice was a whisper. "Yes, thank you." He hesitated. "Do you want me to stay or step away?" Riona looked at him for a long moment. Her walls were cracked, her strength stretched thin, her heart torn between past wounds and present fear. But she also wasn't blind to his sincerity. "Stay," she said quietly. "Just stay close. But don't say anything." He nodded. "I won't." They walked together toward the ICU doors. Not as lovers, but as two people still haunted by what they once were. And as Riona prepared herself to see her son, Darian understood something he hadn't let himself admit until now. He could lie to the world. He could hide behind his success. He could pretend he had moved on. But he could not lie to himself. Not about her. Not anymore. Secrets, fears, and the child who connects them. The nurse led Riona through the sanitizing station outside the ICU, giving her a gown and gloves. Her hands shook so badly she struggled to tie the gown behind her back. "Let me help." the nurse offered gently. "Thank you," Riona whispered, her voice thin from hours of crying and holding herself upright. Darian stood a respectful distance away, his hands clasped behind him. He didn't move, didn't interrupt, didn't insert himself where he wasn't invited, but he didn't leave either. Riona exhaled shakily, her knees nearly buckling. She steadied herself on the doorframe. Okay. I'm ready." She pushed the door open slowly. The soft beeping of machines filled the small room. Wires ran from Niall's tiny chest to monitors overhead. His eyelashes rested peacefully against his cheeks. His breathing still looked a little shallow, but it was steady. Thank God it was steady. Riona stepped forward with trembling hands. "Hi, my sweet boy." She sat in the chair beside his bed, cupping his hand gently. Tears blurred her vision, spilling freely down her cheeks. For the first time since she received the call, she let herself collapse emotionally. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in quiet, trembling sobs that came from a place deeper than fear. It was relief. Pure, life-saving relief. She lifted his palm to her lips and kissed it. "Mama's here. I'm right here. You scared me today, baby." Niall didn't stir, but the monitor responded to her voice, the rhythm shifting just slightly. The nurse glanced at the screen and smiled. "He knows you're here." Riona swallowed hard, nodding as she brushed a hand through her son's soft hair. He looked so small against the white sheets, so fragile despite being the heart and soul of her entire world. She didn't dare blink for several seconds, afraid she might miss even the slightest change. Behind her, Darian stepped quietly into the doorway, stopping just outside the room. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He just watched, not with pity, but with something far deeper, something almost reverent. He had always known Riona would make a wonderful mother. Seeing it, witnessing the tenderness, the heartbreak, the devotion, it hit him harder than anything else that had happened today. Because the way she held him, the protective strength in her posture, the look in her eyes, all of it felt familiar in a way he couldn't explain. He didn't interrupt her moment. He didn't dare. He leaned against the wall outside the room and lowered his head, trying to steady the thoughts pulling at him from every direction. After several minutes, the nurse stepped back and whispered, "I'll give you some privacy." As she walked out, she nodded politely at Darian. He nodded back, but his mind was far from calm. Riona pressed a long kiss to her son's forehead before resting her cheek against the edge of his pillow. She stayed like that for a long time, letting her tears fall freely. The monitors beeped steadily, like a rhythm reminding her to breathe. Eventually, she slowly sat upright and wiped her face. "I'll be back soon, sweetheart," she whispered softly. "Mama's just going to talk to the doctors." She stood, straightened her gown, and took one last look at him before stepping out. When she emerged from the room, she found Darian still in the hallway, waiting. Their eyes locked. This time she didn't look away. She pulled the gown off slowly, her movements heavy with fatigue. "He's resting," she said quietly. Darian nodded. "Good. He looks better than before," she added. "That's a relief," he said. Silence stretched between them. Not tense, not hostile, but thick with everything they weren't saying. Riona stepped toward one of the benches along the wall and sat carefully, her palms pressed against her thighs. Darian followed at a respectful distance, stopping only when she gently said, "You can sit." He lowered himself onto the bench beside her, leaving a space between them, but close enough that she felt his presence. "I'm glad he's stable," he murmured. "Me too." Her voice was barely audible. Riona stared at the ground for a moment before taking a shaky breath. "They said he had trouble breathing last night. He told me his chest hurt, but he brushed it off. I thought he was just tired." "You couldn't have known," Darian said softly. "I should have paid more attention. No one could have predicted this." She shook her head. "Mothers are supposed to sense when something is wrong." "You're doing everything you can," he said gently. "Am I?" she whispered. "Because right now, it feels like everything is slipping through my fingers." The vulnerability in her voice sliced through him. He leaned forward slightly. "You're carrying too much. Anyone would be overwhelmed." She didn't respond. Her eyes drifted to the floor again. After a few seconds, he tried to tread carefully into a question that had been racing through him since he learned she had a child. "Rio, does Niall have anyone else? A father figure?" Riona stiffened. "No, did he ever?" "No," she repeated, more firmly this time. "Are you sure you don't want to talk about it?" he asked gently. She looked at him, her eyes hardening with a quiet warning. "Darian." He lifted his hands slightly in surrender. "Okay, I won't push." Her posture eased, just slightly. The hallway remained quiet for several seconds. Nurses moved past them. A doctor walked into one of the rooms. Someone cried softly down the hall. The world kept spinning around them, but for the two of them, time seemed suspended. At last, Riona sighed. "Life didn't go how I expected." "I don't think anyone's does," he replied. "I tried to build something stable," she continued. "I wanted a home for him. A good life. A peaceful one." Her voice wavered. "But some days, I feel like I'm piecing everything together with nothing but hope." He looked at her with a tenderness she didn't notice. "You're stronger than you know?" She let out a tired breath. "Strength doesn't pay medical bills." That sentence pulled Darian straight into reality. In his world, money solved problems before they had time to grow. In hers, it was a constant threat, a weight that pressed into every decision, every fear, every hope. He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "How much will his treatment cost?" "I don't know yet," she admitted. "But ICU stays aren't cheap. I can—" "Don't," she cut in swiftly. "Don't offer, please." He swallowed. "I wasn't trying to insult you." "You weren't," she said. "But you can't fix everything by throwing money at it." "I know that," he said softly. "I'm offering because I care." She looked at him long and hard. "You don't get to care like that anymore." The quiet weight of her words made him lean back slightly. She continued, her voice quieter, gentler. "I'm not trying to hurt you, Darian, but my life, I built it without you. I had to—" He nodded, even though the words pierced him more deeply than he expected. Footsteps echoed down the hall. 2 nurses walked past, chatting quietly about new admissions. Riona leaned back against the wall, exhaustion dragging her down. "Selena," she murmured, almost to herself. She must be worried. The mention of his wife pulled him from his thoughts. He glanced toward the elevator, guilt pressing into his ribs. "She's resting. The doctors say the baby is fine." "I'm glad," Riona whispered. He studied her face carefully. "You really are alone in this, aren't you?" She exhaled slowly. "Yes." The honesty in that single word crushed him. "Rio," he said quietly, "if you ever need someone to stand with you, I will. Not because I'm trying to take over your life, not because of the past, just because you shouldn't have to carry everything alone." She stared straight ahead, eyes shimmering. "I don't know what to do with an offer like that." "Then don't do anything with it right now," he replied softly. "Just know it's real." She swallowed hard and turned away, unable to hold his gaze. After a long pause, she whispered, "Why did you come back downstairs?" He hesitated, then answered honestly, "Because I couldn't sit still knowing you were down here alone." The truth hung between them like a fragile thread. For the first time, she didn't shut down. She didn't push him away. She didn't argue. She simply breathed. "Human." A doctor approached. "Miss Calder? I'd like to go over some test results with you." Riona stood slowly. "Okay." Darian rose too. "You don't have to come," she said softly. "I know," he replied, "but I'm here." She didn't tell him to leave. She didn't tell him to stay. She turned toward the doctor, and Darian walked beside her. Steady, quiet, respectful, not as her partner, not as her past, but as someone who couldn't walk away anymore. Not now, not again. Fate's unfinished business. The doctor led Riona and Darian into a smaller consultation room just off the ICU corridor. The walls were plain, the chairs simple, the atmosphere too calm for the storm churning in Riona's chest. "Please, sit," the doctor said. Riona lowered herself into a chair, folding her hands tightly in her lap. Darian sat one seat over, angled slightly toward her as if ready to catch her if the ground gave way. The doctor opened a folder and adjusted his glasses. "First, let me reassure you, Miss Calder. Your son is currently stable. His oxygen levels are improving." "That's a positive sign." Riona released a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "Thank you," she whispered. However, the doctor continued gently, "We are concerned about what triggered the episode. It could be related to undiagnosed asthma, an allergic reaction, or another respiratory condition. We're still running tests to narrow it down." Riona nodded, forcing herself to focus. What happens now?" "For now, we keep him under observation," the doctor replied. "We'll perform further evaluations over the next 24 to 48 hours. Once we understand the cause, we'll discuss long-term management." "Long-term?" Her voice shook slightly. "Yes. If this is a chronic condition, he'll need regular care and possibly medication." The words pressed heavily on her shoulders. Long-term, regular care, medication. All she could hear underneath those terms was cost. The doctor seemed to read the concern in her eyes. "Do you have any questions about his medical needs?" Riona swallowed. "Will he be able to live a normal life, with proper treatment and monitoring?" "There's a very good chance he can," the doctor said. "But we need your full cooperation with follow-up visits and prescribed care." She nodded mechanically. "You'll have it? Good." He closed the folder. "For now, I suggest you get some rest. You've had a very emotional day." The word felt foreign. "Thank you, doctor," Darian said, standing to shake his hand. The doctor left them alone. The room felt smaller now, the air thicker. Riona stared at the folder on the table as if it held the rest of her life inside it. "Long-term," she murmured. "Chronic. Medication." Darian watched her, his jaw tightening. "He's going to need care, but he has a strong chance. That's what matters. That's not all that matters, she said quietly. He understood what she meant. The reality of it sat between them like a third person in the room. Rio, he said gently, you don't have to shoulder this without support. I've been doing it for years, she replied. That doesn't mean you're meant to keep doing it alone. She leaned back in her chair and looked up at the ceiling, eyes glistening. Every time I think I've figured out how to survive, something new hits. Life does that, he murmured. She let out a tired breath. You sound like you're quoting one of those motivational talks from conferences. Maybe I am, he said with a faint, humorless smile. Except this time, I'm not talking about a market crash or a failed pitch. I'm talking about someone who matters more than any of that. Her eyes lowered to his face, searching. There it was again, the sincerity that had always made it hard to stay angry with him. It was the same sincerity that once made her believe they could conquer anything together. She tore her gaze away. I should go back to Niall, she said softly. He needs to know I'm close, even if he can't hear me. I'll walk you, Darian offered. She hesitated. You don't have to. I know, he replied, but I want to. They left the consultation room and walked side by side down the hallway. Their shoulders didn't touch, yet the air between them hummed with unspoken words. As they neared the ICU, Riona slowed. You should go back to your wife. She might wake up and need you. She will call the nurse. They'll call me if anything changes, he said. Right now, I'm here. That's not fair to her, Riona replied. It's also not entirely fair to you, he said softly, that you've been carrying everything alone. She bit her lip, frustration and gratitude fighting for space in her chest. He exhaled, a weary sound. Trying to survive the same day, I guess. Thank you for staying, she said without looking at him. She disappeared behind the doors, leaving him alone in the hallway. He stood there for several moments, staring at the spot where she had just been. His chest ached with a thickness he couldn't quite name. Then he forced himself to turn back toward the elevator. Upstairs, the quiet of the private ward felt heavier than before. When Darian stepped into the room, Selina was awake. Her gaze fixed on the television, though her eyes didn't seem to be following the program. She looked over when she heard him. You were gone a while. Yeah. He closed the door behind him. I ran into someone I used to know. A friend? The word felt too small. Someone from my past. There was a pause. The woman from earlier, she asked. The one in the hallway. He met her gaze, surprised. You noticed? I'm pregnant, not oblivious, she said gently. I saw the way you looked at her, and the way she looked at you. He opened his mouth, but she raised a hand faintly. I'm not accusing you of anything, she continued. I just want to understand. He moved closer, sitting on the edge of her bed. Her name is Riona. We were together in college. How serious? She asked. He looked down at his hands. She was important. Selina studied his face. She wasn't dramatic. She never made scenes, but that didn't mean she was blind. Do you still have feelings for her? She asked, her voice steady, not angry, only honest. He didn't answer right away. He thought about Riona's eyes, the way they had met his in the hallway, the memories that had surged up, vivid and uninvited. The catch in his throat when he saw her sitting alone outside the ICU, the helpless pull he felt every time she spoke. I don't know what to call what I feel, he admitted. But seeing her again, it hurt. Selina's throat moved in a tight swallow because of what you had, or because of what you did? Both, he said softly. She looked away for a moment. Is she married? He shook his head. No, she has a son. He's in the ICU. Concern flickered across her face. That's terrible. Yeah, he murmured. It is. Selina took a slow breath. So what now? What do you mean? You've seen her. You've talked to her. You've walked back into a part of your life you never told me much about, she said quietly. What are you going to do with that? His chest tightened. I'm not leaving you, if that's what you're thinking. I didn't say you were, she replied. But I'd be lying if I said I couldn't tell there's history. There is. She nodded, eyes glistening. I spent a lot of time building a future with you, based on the story you told me about yourself. Today, I'm realizing there's a chapter you never let me read. He closed his eyes for a moment, guilt closing in. You're right. That's on me. I don't want you to lie to me because you think I can't handle the truth, she said. If she still matters to you in some way, I need to know that. I don't need details, just honesty. He opened his eyes and met her gaze. She matters to me, he said quietly. What we had, it shaped me. I shouldn't have hidden that from you, but you did, she whispered. Yes. Silence stretched between them, not cold, but fragile. Finally, she sighed. I'm too tired to argue with you right now. I'm sorry, Selina. I know. She closed her eyes briefly, then opened them again. Just don't disappear into memories while I'm lying here. I need you present, at least. You have me, he said, meaning it. She gave a small, weary nod and reached for his hand. He took it, feeling the weight of both lives pressing down on him, the one he had built and the one he had lost. Only then did he allow his thoughts to drift back downstairs, to Riona, to her son, to the questions he couldn't stop circling back to. Was the boy just a child she devoted herself to? Downstairs, Riona sat by Niall's bedside again, watching his chest rise and fall. She smoothed his blanket, adjusted his pillow, and whispered little things in his ear. Stories about the first time he laughed, the day he learned to ride a bike, the morning he burned his pancakes and insisted they tasted perfect anyway. Her world didn't stretch beyond this room, didn't stretch beyond this child, yet somewhere in the back of her mind, she felt a shift she didn't want to acknowledge. Darian was back in her life, not by choice, not by request, but by some force that seemed determined to drag up everything she had tried to bury. She didn't know what to do with that. She didn't know if it was a curse or a chance. She glanced at the door and imagined Darian standing there again. The thought made her chest ache in a way she wasn't ready to explore. Because fate doesn't always ask permission. Sometimes it drags two people back to the place where they broke, but to decide what to do with the pieces. And this time, the pieces were not just theirs. They belonged to a child who knew nothing of their shared history, the moral crossroad. The night blurred into early morning without Riona realizing it. She had dozed off in short, restless stretches, her neck aching every time her head slipped to the side. Each time she jerked awake, the monitors by Niall's bed were the first thing she checked. Still beating. Still steady. Still here. She whispered silent thanks every time. By the time a soft knock sounded on the door, A muted light filtered through the small ICU window. A new doctor stepped in, slightly younger, with kind eyes and a tablet in his hand. "Miss Calder?" he said gently. Riona rose from the chair, rubbing her stiff neck. "Yes, I'm Dr. Lewis. I'll be taking over for the day shift." He glanced at Niall's chart. "I wanted to update you about your son." Her heart sped up. "Is he okay?" Dr. Lewis nodded. "He's improving. His oxygen levels are much more stable now, and his lungs sound clearer than yesterday." "That's excellent progress." Relief washed over her so strongly her knees wobbled. "Thank God." "However," the doctor continued, "we're increasingly confident he has an underlying respiratory condition. Possibly asthma, maybe compounded by allergies. We'll need further tests, but the pattern fits." "What does that mean for him?" she asked. "Long term, it means management, not defeat," Dr. Lewis said. "He'll likely need inhalers, possibly other medication. You'll have to pay attention to his triggers: exercise, dust, sudden weather shifts, certain environments. But with proper care, he can enjoy a full, active life." Her eyes filled with tears again, but this time they were a mix of worry and gratitude. "So he's not permanently damaged?" "At this stage, we see no sign of that," the doctor replied. "You caught this episode in time. That matters." She nodded, hand over her mouth, shoulders loosening just a bit. Dr. Lewis's tone shifted slightly, more practical. "He'll remain here for observation for at least another day. After that, we'll go over an action plan, prescriptions, and specialist follow-ups." "Okay," she murmured. "Whatever he needs." He hesitated. "The administrative office will eventually contact you about insurance and billing. I recommend you speak with them sooner rather than later, so you understand what's covered and what isn't." Her stomach tightened. "I'll be nearby if you have questions," he added. "For now, try to eat something and rest if you can. You'll be more helpful to your son if you're not on the edge of collapse." She gave a faint, grateful smile. "I'll try." The doctor stepped out, and the moment he left, reality slid in with full force. Inhalers, checkups, specialists, long-term care. She looked at Niall, his small chest rising and falling under the thin blanket. His face looked calmer now, color returning slowly to his cheeks. He looked peaceful. He didn't know he was about to become more fragile in the eyes of the world. "I've got you," she whispered, smoothing a wrinkle in his blanket. "Whatever it takes, we'll handle it. I promise." Her words were brave. Her bank account was not. A couple of hours later, after a nurse gently insisted she step out for a short break, Riona found herself in a small office with a woman from the billing department. The woman's tone was polite but practiced. Her screen showed lines of numbers and codes that Riona couldn't interpret, only fear. "So," the administrator said, "fingers tapping the keyboard. Based on your coverage, a percentage of the ICU stay is included, but not all. Some of the tests, medications and monitoring are categorized as extended care and will be billed separately." "How much?" Riona asked, her throat tight. The woman clicked through a few more pages. "This is an estimate, not a final statement, but—" She turned the monitor slightly. Riona stared at the figure. The room seemed to tilt. That's not the final amount," she whispered. "No," the woman replied. "This is a preliminary range." It may go slightly up or down, depending on additional tests or how long he needs to stay. Her heart thudded heavily. The numbers looked impossible. Several months of rent. More than both her jobs could pull together, even if she didn't eat for weeks. "We do have payment plans," the administrator added, almost kindly. "We can spread the cost over time. There are also aid programs you might apply for, but approval isn't guaranteed." How long would the payment plan be?" Riona asked. "Depends on what you can manage monthly," the woman clicked again. "Given your reported income." Riona's cheeks heated. Every detail of her struggle was written in those digital records. "I'll need time," she murmured. "Of course." The woman's voice softened. "But the sooner we set something up, the smoother everything will be. I'll print this estimate for you." She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. A humming printer spat out sheets of paper that might as well have been weights chained to her wrists. Riona took them with shaking hands, thanked the woman mechanically, and stepped out of the office. The hallway outside felt too bright, too open. She walked a few steps, then stopped, her back resting against the wall. Her fingers clutched the papers so tightly they crumpled at the edges. "How am I supposed to do this?" she whispered. Her eyes stung. Sleep deprivation, fear, and financial panic collided inside her until she felt hollow. She didn't notice the familiar presence walking up the corridor. "Rio?" The voice was careful, low, like he was afraid to startle her. She lifted her head. Darian stood a few feet away, a cup of coffee in each hand, concern etched plainly across his features. She swallowed. "I'm not very thirsty." He stepped closer and held one cup out. "It's not about thirst. You need strength." For a second, she almost refused out of instinct. Pride and hurt flared, but exhaustion overruled them. She accepted the cup with a barely audible thanks. He nodded toward the papers in her other hand. "What did they say?" She clutched the documents tighter. "Just numbers. May I see?" he asked gently. Her spine stiffened. "No, it's my responsibility. Your son is your responsibility," he said quietly. "The system is just math and policy. Let me help you face it." She pressed her lips together, resisting. He didn't push. He simply waited, his gaze steady, letting her decide. After a long moment, her shoulders sagged. She held the papers out, her eyes burning. "You asked," she muttered. "Don't say I didn't warn you." He took the sheets and scanned the lines. His jaw tightened almost immediately. The amounts weren't small even by his standards, but where he came from now, they were fixable numbers. To someone living paycheck to paycheck, they were crushing. "Rio," he said quietly, looking up. "This is a lot." She let out a broken laugh. "That's an understatement." He flipped to the next page, reading through details of coverage gaps, line items, and future estimates for specialist visits. By the time he reached the last page, his decision was already made. "I'll cover it," he said. Her head snapped up. "No, Rio, no." Her voice was sharper now. "You don't get to walk back into my life and start paying for things like you're fixing a broken order in your company." "This isn't a broken order," he replied. "This is your son's health. This is you suffocating under something you shouldn't have to face alone." She shook her head, her breathing uneven. "You don't understand. If I say yes, it won't just be about money. It'll be about feeling indebted to you again, relying on you, waiting for the day you disappear, and I have to learn how to stand again." His expression twisted with regret. "That's not what I'm trying to do." "I know," she said, quieter now. "But that doesn't change how it feels." He took a slow step closer. "Let me do this in a way that doesn't put any chains on you. I'll handle it through a foundation, as an anonymous sponsor. No label, no public record linking it to you or to me." Her eyes searched his face. "Why?" "Because I care what happens to you," he said. "Because I care what happens to him." Tears pooled in her eyes. "You barely know him." "I know he's your child," Darian replied. "That's enough for me." She looked away, her throat tight. "You won't owe me anything," he added. "No favors, no emotional debt. I won't bring it up again. I won't use it to insert myself into your life. I'll just know I didn't stand by and watch you drown." Her fingers tightened around the coffee cup. It shook slightly. "What if I say no?" she whispered. "Then I'll respect that," he said. "I'll argue. I'll worry. But I'll respect it." A tear slipped down her cheek, rolling over the curve of her face. She brushed it away with the back of her hand. "This isn't about pride," she murmured. "I know," he said. "It's about trust." She nodded. Trust, the thing that had been fractured between them years ago, left to heal in crooked lines. She thought of Niall, lying alone in that room, needing medication, checkups, and more care than she'd realized. She thought of the bills that would stack up on her kitchen table, of the nights she'd sit up with the calculator, trying to stretch numbers that would never be enough, of the worn-out shoes she bought instead of new ones, of the way Niall always said, "It's okay, Ma. I don't need it," when he clearly did. Her heart twisted. "Can you really do it anonymously?" she asked. "Yes," he answered without hesitation. "I do it all the time for other people. It's one of the few parts of my life that actually makes sense." She swallowed. "And you won't hold it over me?" "Never. You won't tell him?" She added quietly. His eyes softened. "No, that will be your choice. Your story to tell." Her mind raced. Saying yes meant stepping into uncertain territory. Not just financially, but emotionally. It meant accepting help from the one man who had broken her heart so thoroughly she never trusted anyone that deeply again. But saying no meant making her son pay the price for her fears. She exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of her decision. "This is not for me," she said finally. "This is for him. I know," he said. She lifted her gaze, meeting his eyes with a mixture of resolve and vulnerability. "Fine. You can help. But we keep it quiet. No one needs to know. Not my landlord, not my co-workers, not even Niall, unless I decide it's time." "Agreed," he said. "Completely. And you don't get to buy your way back into my life with this," she added firmly. "You don't get to use this as an open door." He flinched faintly at the words, but nodded. "Understood?" She nodded once. Then, "Thank you." The gratitude tasted strange on her tongue, heavy, reluctant, but genuine. He held her gaze, something like awe flickering in his eyes. "You're still the bravest person I know." She looked away quickly, her cheeks damp. "Don't make this bigger than it is." "It already is," he said quietly. "You just can't see it yet." Down the hall, near the corner where the ICU wing met the elevator corridor, Selina stood with the nurse, a discharge folder in her hand. Her doctor had cleared her to go home with strict instructions to rest and return if anything felt off. She had come downstairs to sign one last form. She hadn't meant to overhear anything. She certainly hadn't meant to see what she saw. But when she turned from the nurse's station, her gaze drifted down the hall, right toward the spot where Riona and Darian stood facing each other. She watched her husband hold a stack of papers. She watched him speak to Riona with a depth of tenderness she had rarely seen directed at anyone else. She saw Riona's shoulders shaking. She saw him offer her a tissue, his expression raw, earnest. Their connection was obvious. Deep. Inside Selina's chest, something shifted. Jealousy wasn't her nature. Fear wasn't either. But she was not blind. As she watched them, a single question settled into her mind. The nurse called her name again, drawing her attention back. Selina straightened, forcing a composed expression. She signed the last line, thanked the staff, and took the folder, not touching, but not distant either. Selina's grip tightened on the folder. There were more conversations coming. More truths she would demand, but for now, she quietly stepped back into the elevator, letting the doors close between her and the sight of the man she loved, standing between his past and his present. Back near the ICU doors, Riona paused, looking at Darian. "I still don't know if accepting this was a mistake," she admitted softly. "It won't be," he said. "You're choosing what's best for your child." She nodded, even as uncertainty lingered. This was her crossroad, not just between independence and support, or admitting that, sometimes, survival required letting someone else step in. "Go," Darian said gently. "I'll handle the rest." She walked inside without looking back. He watched her go with a heart full of regret, determination, and something else he was no longer willing to ignore. This wasn't just unfinished history. This was a second chance he didn't deserve, but couldn't stop wanting. The truth that can no longer hide. The day moved slowly, like the hospital itself was giving Riona time to gather strength she no longer had. She stayed by Niall's bedside, adjusting his blanket, smoothing his hair, whispering soft things into the stillness. Every now and then she would brush her thumb across his cheek, just to reassure herself he was warm. Just to reassure herself he was here. Outside the glass, nurses passed quietly. Voices drifted from the hall in soft waves. Somewhere down the corridor, someone laughed. An exhausted, relieved laugh only people in hospitals ever understood. Life continued. But inside this small room, Riona's world stood still. Her son, her heart, her reason for everything. She placed her palm gently against his chest, counting each rise and fall. Only when she felt certain the rhythm was steady did she let out a fragile breath. That was when she heard it. A knock on the doorframe. Respectful. Familiar. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. "Rio?" Darian's voice was low, careful, like he knew the slightest wrong note might break her. She straightened in her chair, but she didn't look at him yet. "How's Selina?" she asked, keeping her eyes on her son. "She's been discharged," he replied. "The doctors told her to rest at home." "That's good." Riona smoothed Niall's hair again. "She needs you." A beat of silence passed. "Are you asking me to leave?" he asked quietly. She closed her eyes. "I don't want to ask you for anything." "That's not what I asked," he murmured. She finally turned her head. He stood in the doorway, shoulders tense, as though bracing himself. His eyes moved from her face to Niall's sleeping form, then back to her. She swallowed. "What do you want, Darian?" His throat worked. "To understand." She frowned. "Understand what?" His voice cracked. "Barely noticeable, but real. Where I fit into all of this." Her heart clenched. "You don't," she said softly. Another beat of silence. He stepped closer. "Then tell me something honestly. I won't judge your answer. I won't push. I just need the truth." "About what?" His eyes softened. The kind of softness that was dangerous. The kind that felt like old promises and unfinished love. "Is he mine?" Riona went still. Her breath froze. Her fingers halted in Niall's hair. Her entire body tightened. She stared at Darian, wide-eyed, as if he had pulled a string that unraveled something she'd spent years tying into neat knots. She tried to speak, but nothing came out at first. Darian stepped closer, slowly, carefully. "Rio, tell me." Her voice came out thin and strained. "Why would you think that?" "Because I know you," he said. "I know how you loved. I know you wouldn't have given yourself to someone who wasn't willing to give you the world." Tears rushed to her eyes. "That was before," she whispered, voice trembling. He glanced at Niall again. "He's what, 8, 9? 8, she said. He nodded slowly, breathing deep. 8 years ago. You and I were still—" "Don't do this," she cut in sharply, tears spilling over. "Not like this." He knelt beside her chair, his voice low but steady. "Rio, look at him. Look at his face, his shape, his eyes. Tell me you don't see it." She shook her head hard. "Stop." He exhaled shakily. "If he's mine, I deserve to know. If he's not, I'll walk out of here and never bring it up again. But if he is—" His voice broke completely now. "If he is, then I've been absent from my son's whole life without even knowing it." That shattered her. She pressed a hand to her mouth as the sob tore through her. She hadn't cried like this, even in the worst moments of fear. But now, the truth clawed its way out of the place she had buried it for 8 long, brutal years. She leaned forward, shoulders shaking. Darian reached out instinctively, but stopped inches from touching her, waiting for permission she didn't give. "Rio," he whispered, tears pooling in his own eyes now. "Please." She took in a trembling breath, wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand, and forced herself to speak. "Darian," she whispered, her voice breaking, "you left before I even knew." "You left," she repeated, tears falling again, "and I didn't know I was pregnant until after you were gone." He stared at her, frozen. "I tried," she whispered. "I called once. I texted. Your number changed. You were already in another state, buried in your new world. And I knew that if I followed you, I would chase you forever. I couldn't do that to myself. I couldn't raise a child with someone who didn't even know I existed in their life anymore." His chest rose and fell in fast, uneven breaths. "Rio." His voice cracked. "Are you telling me?" "Yes." She pressed a trembling hand to her chest. "He's yours." The words filled the room and reshaped the air. For a moment Darian didn't move. Couldn't move. His eyes went to Niall, sleeping peacefully beneath the thin blanket. His son, his blood. 8 years of life he had missed, 8 birthdays, 8 Christmases, 8 years of first steps, first words, first everything. He sank onto the floor beside the bed, his hands gripping the railing as if he needed something to hold on to before he fell apart completely. Riona watched him, her own heart breaking at the sight. She reached out, instinctively brushing her fingers against the back of his hand. He didn't pull away. He clasped her hand tightly, bowing his head, tears slipping onto the edge of the bed. "I had a son," he whispered, "and I didn't even know." Riona's voice trembled. "I'm sorry." He shook his head violently. "No, don't apologize. I left. I walked away. I made choices that pushed you out of my life. This is on me." She wiped her cheek again. "I didn't want to disrupt your world. You were becoming everything you dreamed of. I didn't think you'd want this." He looked up sharply, pain twisting in his eyes. "I would have wanted him. I would have wanted both of you." Her voice broke into a whisper. "I didn't want to risk hearing otherwise." He closed his eyes, the truth cutting deep. They stayed like that. Her in the chair, him on the floor, their hands intertwined across the railing, two parents broken by time and decisions they couldn't take back. After a long, quiet moment, he spoke again. "I want to be in his life," he said softly. "If you'll let me." She blinked, new tears forming. "I don't know how to do this." "Neither do I," he admitted. "But we don't have to know everything right now. We just have to start." Her breath quivered. "What about Selena?" He inhaled deeply. "I'll tell her the truth. She'll be hurt. She deserves honesty. I owe her that." "And the baby?" Riona asked quietly. He swallowed. "I'll be there for my child. All of them." Riona looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time without the fog of shock, fear, or exhaustion. He wasn't the boy she left behind. He wasn't the man she feared he'd become. He was flawed, human, trying in ways he never had before. She took a shaky breath. "This doesn't fix the past." A soft, weak groan came from the bed. Riona shot to her feet. "Niall?" Darian stood instantly, wiping his face with the back of his sleeve. Niall's eyelashes fluttered. His fingers twitched. Slowly, his eyes opened, heavy but conscious. "Mama?" he whispered. Riona burst into tears, bending down to kiss his forehead over and over. "I'm here, baby. I'm right here." Niall blinked sluggishly, then noticed the tall figure standing beside his mother. Darian remained perfectly still. Her heart pounded. She looked at Darian. He nodded once, soft, steady, and full of quiet promise. "Take your time," he whispered. Riona turned to her son, brushing his hair gently. "That's a friend," she said softly. "Someone who cares about you already. Someone who wants to help." Niall blinked again, eyes drifting toward Darian. Darian knelt beside the bed, offering the smallest smile, a smile full of warmth and awe and something that looked suspiciously like love. "Hey, champ," he said quietly. "I'm really glad you're awake." Niall stared at him for a moment, then whispered, "Are you going to help my mom?" She cries. "A lot." Riona's breath caught. Tears fell onto her son's blanket. Darian's voice thickened. "Yeah," he said softly. "I'm going to help both of you. For as long as you'll let me." Niall's eyes drifted closed again, but a tiny smile touched his lips. "Okay," he murmured. Riona covered her mouth, a sob escaping. Darian reached out, resting his hand gently on the bedrail. Not touching her, not rushing her, just anchoring himself to the moment, to them. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't neat, it wasn't easy, but something new, fragile, trembling, hopeful, began quietly blooming between all three of them. The beginning of a family neither had planned, but both had unknowingly needed, the beginning of a blissful, healing future, a future rewritten. Morning sunlight crept through the small ICU window, warming the sterile room with a gentle brightness. It felt like a quiet blessing, a soft reminder that endings could also be beginnings in disguise. Niall slept peacefully again, this time without the frantic beeping or shallow breaths that had terrified everyone the day before. His chest rose and fell steadily, the machines responding with calm, rhythmic pulses. Riona sat beside him like she had all night. But the exhaustion that had once weighed her down was now mixed with something new. Uncertainty, yes, but also hope. A fragile hope, still learning how to breathe, but alive nonetheless. Her fingers traced small circles over the back of her son's hand. She breathed with him. She prayed with each inhale. She silently thanked the universe with each exhale. Behind her, the door opened quietly. She didn't turn. She knew who it was just from the shift in the room's air. Darian. He stood by the doorway for a moment, simply watching them. A mother and child bound by a love he should have been part of years ago. He cleared his throat softly. "How's he doing?" She looked back. "Better." The doctor said he responded well to the last treatment. "That's good," he said gently. He stepped forward, but slowly, like he didn't want to intrude on something sacred. His eyes softened when he reached the side of the bed. "Can I?" he asked, motioning toward the empty chair. She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes." He sat, folding his hands in his lap, trying to steady himself. Every time he looked at Niall, something inside him tugged, a mix of regret, awe, and longing. "He looks peaceful," Darian whispered. "He hasn't looked peaceful in days," she replied quietly. He nodded, jaw tight. "I'm glad he finally can." They stayed that way for a long moment, just the quiet hum of machines, the closeness of shared worry, and the unspoken truth that everything between them had changed forever. A gentle awakening. A small sound broke the silence. Niall stirred, stretching his fingers before slowly cracking open his eyes. Riona leaned in immediately. "I'm right here, baby." Niall blinked, adjusting to the light and the faces around him. His gaze drifted to Darian. "You stayed?" he whispered. Niall studied him quietly for a few seconds. He had always been an observant child, his eyes picking up truths adults sometimes tried to hide. "Are you my mom's friend?" he asked again. Riona opened her mouth, but Darian's voice came first, soft, careful, and full of truth he could no longer avoid. "I'm more than that," he said. Riona turned, eyes widening. Darian swallowed, his voice steady but emotional. "Yes." Riona reached for his hand. "Sweetheart, remember when I told you that you didn't just come from me, but from someone who cared about me once?" Niall nodded, eyes sleepy but locked on hers. "Well," she whispered, glancing at Darian, "you're old enough to know that people sometimes love each other, even if they don't stay together." "And him?" he asked. Niall absorbed her words slowly. Darian nodded, tears rising. "Yes, and I'm so sorry I wasn't here before. I didn't know, but I'm here now. If you'll let me—" Niall's lips parted in surprise. He looked at Riona as if asking for confirmation she had already given. She nodded gently. "He's telling you the truth, baby." Niall turned back to Darian. "Are you going to stay?" he whispered. Darian's voice cracked. "As long as you want me to—" A tiny smile pulled at Niall's lips. "Okay." Something inside Darian shattered and healed in the same breath. He brought a trembling hand to his chest, overwhelmed. Riona looked away to wipe her tears. She didn't want to overwhelm her son with emotions he didn't fully understand yet, but the sight of them, father and son finding each other in a hospital room, was almost too much to bear. For the first time in years, she felt something warm spreading in her chest, a sense of belonging she didn't expect to feel again. A difficult conversation. Later that afternoon, after the nurses changed Niall's fall and the doctor checked on him, Darian stepped into the hallway to call Selina. A pause. "Is he yours?" she asked. He closed his eyes, leaning against the wall. "Yes." Another pause. Longer, this time heavier. "I thought so," she said softly. "You don't have to explain," she interrupted, her voice thin. "I saw the way you looked at him. And at her. I'm not angry about the child. He didn't ask for any of this." "I know," she whispered. "You always meant well. But you've been haunted for years by something you never told me. By someone you never healed from." "I don't deserve to stand between a man and his child," she said quietly. "And you don't deserve to live two different lives." Then she said the words he knew were coming, but wasn't ready to hear. "I think we need time apart." Darian's head dropped into his hand. "Selina, I'll be okay," she whispered. "And you need to be a father. Start there. Everything else can be figured out later." The call ended gently. No screaming, no blame. Just two adults acknowledging a truth neither could dodge anymore. Darian stayed there for a moment, staring at the floor. Then he exhaled and straightened. The world had shifted. His future had changed shape. The first step toward something new. That evening, the ICU nurse allowed only one parent to stay overnight. But when she saw the raw relief on Niall's face every time Darian entered the room, she quietly pulled 2 extra chairs into the small space. "Parents," she said simply, giving Riona a soft smile. Riona felt her eyes warm. Darian murmured a quiet thank you. They settled on each side of the bed, Riona on the right, Darian on the left. Niall looked between them, smiling in a way that made the machines feel less intimidating. "Can I ask something?" Niall said, voice small. "Anything," Riona replied. "Are you two friends?" She exchanged a glance with Darian. They both laughed softly, tender, unsure. "We're trying," she said. "Trying is good," Niall murmured, closing his eyes again. Riona smoothed his hair. "Sleep, sweetheart." When he drifted off, Darian leaned back in his chair. "He's incredible," he said softly. She nodded. "He is— You did all of this," he whispered. "You raised him into this gentle, smart, brave little boy." "Alone? I wasn't alone," she said. "I had him—" Darian's voice deepened. "I wish I could have been there." Riona looked down at her hands. "You weren't," she said simply. "But you're here now. And that counts for something." He breathed out slowly. "I won't leave again. Not him. Not you. I don't mean we have to be together. he said quickly. I mean, I'm here. As his father. As someone who cares about your well-being. As someone who wants to help you rebuild whatever needs rebuilding. She nodded, voice trapped somewhere in her chest. Let me show you I can be steady, he added. Not the man who ran. Not the boy who chose ambition over everything else. And what if I'm afraid to trust you? She whispered. Then I'll give you reasons to take small steps, he replied. No pressure, no rushing. Just time and consistency. Tears filled her eyes again, this time different from the tears she'd shed in fear or regret. These were tears of possibility, a weekend of healing. 2 days later, Niall was moved from the ICU to a regular pediatric room. He was still tired, still weak, but the improvement was undeniable. Darian practically lived in the hospital, balancing calls from his team, meetings he postponed, and checking on his son every few minutes. And the more he showed up, the more Riona softened, not in romance, not yet, but in trust. She watched him, feed him ice chips, and every hour her heart thawed a little more. One night, after Niall fell asleep watching cartoons, Darian stepped into the hallway to stretch. Riona followed him quietly. He nodded slowly. I was afraid I made myself into someone you'd never want to look at again. You hurt me, she said honestly. But hate? No, she hesitated. I don't know, she whispered. But it's not hate. He accepted that, not with entitlement, but with quiet gratitude. Something inside him unclenched. Riona crossed her arms, hugging herself gently. You've changed. They stood in silence for a long moment before she added, for the better. His heart nearly stopped. Release day. When the doctor announced Niall could go home, Riona cried happy tears. Niall beamed. Darian immediately arranged transportation, prescriptions, and a check-up schedule with a focus that impressed even the nurses. At the hospital entrance, Niall held both their hands. Can we get pancakes? He asked, bright-eyed. Riona laughed. Not today. You need rest. But tomorrow? He asked. Darian ruffled his hair. Pancakes tomorrow, big stack. Promise. Riona looked at them, father and son, and her heart warmed in a way she didn't expect. As they walked toward the car, Darian glanced at her. I'd like to stay involved, not just financially, not just as a visitor. I want to be part of his life every day I can, he continued. Doctor visits, school meetings, bedtime stories, everything. She smiled softly. We'll take it one step at a time. And us? He asked carefully. She met his gaze. Time, Darian. But you're earning something I didn't think you'd get back. Hope flickered in his eyes. Your trust. She nodded. Yes, he breathed out, overwhelmed. That's enough for me. They reached the car. Darian opened the back door for Niall, helping him settle in safely. Before closing the door, he whispered, I love you, kid. Niall blinked, surprised, but smiled. I like you too. Darian laughed softly, wiping his eyes. Riona watched the exchange with a full heart. As Darian closed the door and stepped beside her, she took a breath and said something she hadn't said to him in years. Welcome back, Darian. He froze. Then he smiled, a smile that held relief, gratitude, and something she hadn't seen since they were young. Not rushed, not demanded, not desperate,